Hello and welcome into Southeastern 16. Today is our Power Rankings edition heading into week 3. Really hard to do these rankings this week. We had a lot of discrepancy between teams on our staff Power Rankings. And yes, that's more than just the three of us in the show. We'll jump into those in just a moment, starting from the bottom. But Blake Lovell, tell folks who sponsors this content, please.
Miami Hurricanes, NIL Collective, no longer sponsoring here at Southeastern 16. They have moved on.
Yet still sending me texts.
Still sending Chris texts, but they are no longer our sponsor. Instead, it is our friends at BetOnline who have been our sponsor, as you know, for a good while now. The world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for everything football, every stat, every matchup, live odds and spreads during the games to bet on. If you know your stuff, get on that $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week. Your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. As Chase and I said on the Saturday Night Reaction Show, if you picked against us last week, you are probably $200,000 richer. When the game's over, head to Line Casino, play some blackjack, unwind with over 150 slots games. Head to their website today to get on the action. Bet online. The game starts here.
I would start at the bottom. Blake, please unveil our number 16 team.
Look at Mike. Is this Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon or what? Number 16 is Mississippi State. The Bulldogs, who check in at the bottom. So that means if you're a Florida fan, you are moving on up.
I mean, you know, we know this game was late on the West Coast, but still, I thought Mississippi State would perform better offensively. They could not run the ball, and I think that's a big concern for State moving forward.
I think their biggest concern was Cam Scattleboo and I stayed up and watched till the final play. Just ran all over them. They knew what was coming late, couldn't stop it. I think they have got some strength and depth issues in the front seven that showed up, and I think those are going to be kind of tough to overcome against some SEC offenses. But they did show some fight. They were down 30-3, nearly made it a game at the end, and there were some things to be encouraged there with too.
Mississippi State plays Toledo this week. A little action for the Bulldogs. So, all right, number 15, hide your eyes if you're a fan of this team. Because, boy, did they take a tumble. Guys, number 15, the staff composite rankings, the Kentucky Wildcats.
Just uninspired Saturday. I was not impressed. And Chris and I have talked really all summer about how we thought this was a Kentucky team that had a really good defense that, you know, with Brock Vandagriff could get some things done, but they just got pounded. South Carolina was running all over them, making things happen. They just, again, looked uninspired on their home field in their first SEC game. There's a lot of concerns, I feel like, for Kentucky, especially going into what they're going to this Saturday.
Their offense just has been just so disjointed in recent years. I feel like Ray Davis last year made it for a lot of issues with them. But, I mean, when your starting quarterback gets sacked more than he has completions, that's a big problem. I was big on Kentucky. I was vocal about it. I'm starting to think I just was way wrong. I'm wondering if their offensive deficiencies are just going to be too much to overcome. Still like their defense, but you got to get off the field.
Boy, Chris, the master of a segue, because speaking of offensive deficiencies, this team has also made a bit of a slide in our power rankings. Number 14 in the staff composite rankings. And this is interesting because, again, you haven't seen Florida yet. And remember, Florida just got walloped in week 1 against Miami. But the fact is, I think our staff was so disappointed by the performances of Kentucky and Auburn that they have now moved behind the Gators, which, spoiler alert, we'll get to them shortly. But Auburn is 14.
Again, just uninspired. You're on your home field. You get Cal coming in, a team who you struggled at times with last year, but you won that game out on the West Coast in the late night football. So you get them in for a 2:30 game, and Auburn's offense just, they 5 interceptions. Peyton Thorne just inconsistent like he was last year. All this talk of how much better he is and how great the receivers are. Well, if you have a great receiving room, which I think they do, you have to have a quarterback to get it to them, and Peyton Thorne couldn't get it to them on Saturday. So there's some problems with Auburn. Cal moved the ball great on him, I thought. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some issues there, especially offensively. I know they had a big win over Alabama A&M, but we learned so much more about this team Saturday when they're put under pressure, and they couldn't perform under pressure.
Hugh Freeze spent all off season talking up his quarterback. It's not working. I mean, in this day and age where you can just go out and buy a quarterback in the portal, I'm just mystified why they didn't do that. And if you don't have a quarterback, it is really hard to have a good football team. And I still think they got some parts, and maybe this was an aberration, but the way they just got smacked by Cal was mind-boggling.
Well, speaking of quarterbacks, another great segue from the one and only Chris Lee here. The Florida Gators have moved up somehow from being last in our rankings last week. They move up this many spots, but again, there wasn't much that separated these teams, or at least these three teams, I think, before you get to Mississippi State. But DJ Lagway, Chase, we talked about it. My goodness, the numbers that he put up, I know it's Samford, but at the same time, at least maybe this gives Florida fans a little bit of optimism now heading into a big game against Texas A&M this week.
Yeah, and I'm curious how they're going to keep using Lagway when Mertz is back healthy, how that's going to work out. Because it was Samford, but I was impressed with going back and watching some highlights of that one, what he looked like, what he was able to do, his decisions. Like, I think there could be something there that if Florida needs a spark, which I think they will, as they get into SEC play and the rest of their schedule, that Lagway could be a guy they could depend on. I'm interested to see how that works for Florida.
Moving Florida up this far feels like an overreaction unless you watched teams 14 and 15. But they've got an issue now. Billy Napier's got a decision to make. And I get not wanting to bench your starting quarterback based on another guy taking the job in a game against a bad team. I mean, Samford's not even a good FCS team as far as I know. But at the same time, we know the backdrop of the season. We know how excited people are with young quarterbacks that can do a lot. And look, he may just have to invent a reason to do it, because I don't know what the path is going forward for excitement if it doesn't involve DJ Lagway.
Yep. Like you said, we would never overreact here at Southeastern 16 in our staff composite rankings. But look, it's week 3, so there are going to be some of those overreactions because – we mentioned it. You go from week 1 to week 2, and you have some of these teams play a step up in competition, like a Kentucky, like an Auburn, and then So I can understand why maybe the votes went backwards a little bit. All right, number 12, the team that still should be ranked higher in my world, although I don't know if I ranked them higher actually. Number 12 is Vanderbilt, who beat Alcorn State 55-0, Chris, and will now head to Georgia State in a very interesting road game here for the Commodores.
Well, we should never overreact to a beatdown of a hapless FCS team, but all we have to go by is 2 games so far. And I think a game like that, you just kind of view it with the did you take care of business perspective. And they didn't allow Alcorn State past midfield all game. They pitched a shutout. They had a punt return touchdown, had a pick 6. Had held them under 100 total yards with backups playing the whole second half. I thought that was a very methodical, take care of business type of win for Vanderbilt. And, interested to see what they do on their first road trip this week.
I think that's the biggest thing. They kept their foot on the gas the whole time. Like Chris said, they didn't allow them across midfield. That says a lot about Vanderbilt. And I feel like in years past that would not have happened. So the fact that they're able to keep their foot on the gas the whole time and win it the way they did, that's what impresses me.
Number 11, Texas A&M. I don't remember where they were at last week. I'm pretty sure they were higher, but as we know, there are a couple teams that are going to jump them this week in our rankings. I think, Chris, one of the things you said, you wanted to see Texas A&M and Oklahoma kind of put their foot down a bit this week. One team did, one team did not, but yet the Aggies are the ones that moved to number 11 here.
Chase, I still don't know what to make of them. I really don't. Do you?
No, I don't. They're inconsistent. I think they showed more consistency again against McNeese Saturday, but they've got Florida this week, which I think is going to be an interesting game to see kind of where they're at. Like They had their chances against Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame goes and blows it against Northern Illinois the other day. And so, I'm not sure what to make of Texas A&M yet. I think it'll take a couple more weeks. I feel like even past this Florida game to get our finger on what the pulse of this A&M team is.
Well, number 10, this team had every chance in the world to move up to probably 7 or 8 maybe in our rankings. And we know what happened, as Chase and I discussed on Saturday nights. Every mistake you could possibly make happened for the Arkansas Razorbacks in that overtime loss at Oklahoma State. Yes, there's probably some optimism, as we saw, Chase, in the reaction. People are saying, hey, we just went on the road, took it to overtime, top 16, 20 team, whatever. But, boy, that is one where you're going to look back on and say what might have been, depending on how the rest of the season goes, perhaps.
I mean, it was a tale of two halves, really. Arkansas looked so great the first half and just struggled to contain Oklahoma State in the second half. I mean, and I think there is reason for optimism, but you also have to think Arkansas could have won that game and could be 2-0 at this point. And, you start losing some of these close games, they're going to start adding up. Like last year, they lost 5 one-score games to some really good teams. They just couldn't finish. They've got to be able to finish. I think if they learn that, then they'll definitely move up.
I feel like the best way to sum it up is if you watch them, you were both encouraged by and disgusted by them. I don't know how else to put it. If you watch the game, you know what I mean. I mean, they are number 2 in the country in total offense right now. They obviously have something working there, and they were clearly the better team. But you got to take care of business and win games. I think that'll be a learning opportunity. I think if we could just ignore the way they lost, we'd have moved them up higher. I thought this was an interesting game for them, and it was, but not the kind of interesting in some ways you wanted coming out of this one.
Not sure I wouldn't take Arkansas right now on a neutral field against a couple teams that are in front of them.
I think I might
but this
too.
team, I don't know, because I think this team made the biggest move this week, and that is number 9 South Carolina, who went in and just took it to Kentucky. The Gamecocks, after we were all questioning what's going on with this team after week 1, well, no need to overreact, because they just went out and thumped Kentucky 31-6 in Lexington.
And I'll be the first to tell you, as I said Saturday night, I had issues. I had major issues with South Carolina after the Old Dominion game. Maybe Old Dominion was better than we thought. I think they are. But this South Carolina team went out and proved something Saturday afternoon and really got some attention on them. I mean, enough to get College Game Day to come to Columbia, South Carolina for their matchup with LSU Saturday. But I really liked what I saw from them. They looked like a totally different team, I feel like, on both sides of the ball. But especially what they were able to do against a veteran Kentucky defense really impressed me. They were able to stop, and again, just obliterate the Kentucky offensive line. Like they played so well on both sides of the ball, and they were really physical. And I think that's what's going to get some teams that play South Carolina this year is just their physicality.
Hard for me to know what to do with them because, again, this era of college football, if you don't have an offense that's got some answers and you don't have consistent, solid quarterback play, it's tough to win. But at the same time, we talked about A&M two teams ago. I said, Chase, what do we think of them? I don't know what they are. I think at least Carolina's got an identity, right? And Carolina's always going to be good on special teams when Shane Beamer's there. We have seen a pass rush. I don't know if that says more about Kentucky or South Carolina, but I think we need to give Carolina some credit. I feel like they have a toughness and an identity, and they just know how to win football games after what we've seen 2 weeks. And oh, by the way, looking ahead, that stadium is going to be packed and pumped with this game with LSU. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I think the concerns are still there.
Yeah, I think because we do these weekly, like it's okay to overreact because you have to reward wins sometimes.
Yeah,
and it's
you do.
You also have to punish the losses. And that's why, like I said, Arkansas, I think, would have had a great opportunity. And I would not be surprised if people would maybe favor Arkansas in neutral games against a couple teams. And I'm just going to tell you, this team right here, Chris, when we compiled our composite rankings, this was the one I was most fascinated by because I had no idea where they were going to wind up. But I was a little surprised to see Oklahoma at number 8 still. Because, Chase, we talked about it on Saturday. And, Chris, you said Saturday morning, you want to see Oklahoma put the foot down. That did not happen on Saturday. So,
but they still have a defense.
They do.
And there's part of me that says I don't know that their offense can get worse. I am interested to see what it looks like when the line gets a little more cohesive. They've got a talent there. But, yeah, I mean, I've been concerned about that offense ever since about the second quarter on of the Temple game, and certainly the Sooners did nothing to alleviate that on Saturday.
Yeah, I do like their defense still, and I think their defense can keep them in a lot of games if they're not consistent on offense like they were Saturday.
All right, number 7, LSU. Chase, I feel like this was one of several games when we started the reaction show on Saturday. We're like, oh boy, what is this team doing? And then they just kind of cranked it up and took care of business against Nichols. And as you said, Chris, they now get ready to head to Columbia to play the Gamecocks.
I feel like this is the case for several games Saturday. They weren't pretty, but they were wins. Like, they found ways to win, and LSU did that. They were able to string together a good fourth quarter and even a pretty good third quarter and separate themselves and get it done after some early struggles. But, yeah, they got the win, and I feel like that's one of those games for them. You look past and you get ready now for South Carolina, which is the most important game for them as they start SEC play.
I think if I'd checked the injury report before I filed my vote, I might have moved them down a couple of spots. They've got a big injury to Guillory on the defensive line. We said before the season that just did not look like an LSU defensive line. They were very underwhelming in the Nichols game. Feels like their pass protection or their offensive line play hadn't quite been what people wanted. You had the Emory injury earlier in the year. Now, in the back of my head is this whole thing that 2 years ago, nobody was impressed with LSU this time of the year. Remember, they got waxed by Tennessee in September, and everybody kind of wrote them off, and we know what happened. They ended up making the SEC title game. But, I think there were already a few cracks, the defensive injuries and the lack of great play there, the injury to what looked like their best running back, and just the questions of, okay, you got Garrett Nussmeier. He's pretty good, but he's not Jaden Daniels. I don't know. I've got some concerns here too, and I'm very interested to see how LSU responds in Columbia Saturday.
Number 6, Missouri. Not really, I guess, a lot to add on kind of these top tier teams, especially for Missouri, who took care of business against Buffalo and just keep doing their thing.
One team in the country has got 2 shutouts. It's the Missouri Tigers.
And I think that says a lot about them. And I think we still have some things to learn about Missouri, but yeah, they've got the job done 2 weeks in a row.
All right, number 5, Alabama. I don't remember where Alabama was at last week, but they may have been 4 or 5, I believe. But Chase, again, a tale of 2 halves of the SEC reaction show on Saturday night, where we're starting off, and I think it was Alabama was up 2. I think, yep. And then all of a sudden the game ends up 42-16 or whatever. So,
yeah, and you look back at the game, and obviously the score does indicate how it played out. Alabama with some offensive line issues, a couple of guys out, having to move some guys around, just penalties galore in that game. I think they could have called holding every play on Alabama's offensive line, and it felt like at points they were, just because every time Alabama got a big play, it was called back because of holding or something like that. So they've got to clean that stuff up. And also they got big played on defense. Now it helps that South Florida's quarterback was not hitting his targets, but there were several wide open guys that got straight through the secondary, and but their quarterback couldn't hit them. So it would have been a totally different ball game if he could have hit his targets. But still, there's some issues in that Alabama secondary where I don't know if there was miscommunication or they all weren't on the same page, but there were several guys who were wide open deep downfield. South Florida couldn't capitalize on it. It would have been a different game. They've got to clean that up for this week. But overall, once I feel like the offensive line is back and healthy, I feel like this will be a different Alabama team.
I don't know what more to make of them than I did before the first snap of the season. I mean, super impressive last week, and they did, to their credit, take care of business late and put the hammer down and make this game look more lopsided than it was. But the concerns you mentioned, especially on the offensive line, I think are things that I was getting texts from Alabama fan friends, and I was hearing those things too. Look, I think this is a get your attention game, although I would have thought that going into South Florida, the way that game went last year, that would have been the same situation. I think they win at Wisconsin, and then you get that off week for that Georgia game, which I think will tell us a lot about how good they are.
I'll tell you, got my attention, Chris.
Ooh.
The number 4 Tennessee Vols in our power rankings this week. I think you can make the argument to move them up a spot, but that's my just own personal opinion and composite ranking. The Vols just took it to NC State, and I know there are people who I've seen since say, well, NC State wasn't that good, but if you're looking at this Tennessee team and that's your first thought after that game, I don't know what to tell you because, as we said, Chase, defensive line, unreal, offensive weapons galore. Tennessee just took NC State to the woodshed there on Saturday.
They did, and I mean that looks like a playoff team when you look at Tennessee. I mean, it really does. And there was a couple of turnovers, but I think you can look past those and see how good this Tennessee team is. But yeah, there was no stopping them Saturday night. North Carolina State it was a mismatch because Tennessee is that much better. However good North Carolina State is, Tennessee was just that much better. And I feel like it's going to be that case in a lot of games for Tennessee this year. They're loaded. I like them.
Two things can be true, and I've got receipts on this. I thought that NC State was way overrated. I did not have any clue why that was just a 10-point game. I was really confused when that was a 7-point line. At the same time, you got to be super impressed with Tennessee. We still want to see how that secondary holds up against like an elite SEC type passing attack. But man, these guys haven't given up a defensive touchdown their last 3 games. I know one of those was an FBS team. I know one of those was an Iowa team. But you got to give credit where credit's due just for focus and consistency. This team is scary. Chase, I think we were debating a week or two ago whether Tennessee was a playoff team or not. I think I said it was basically 50-50. And I had not made up my mind. I think I made up my mind now. I think this is a playoff team until I see something that tells me that the Vols are not.
All right, number 3, Ole Miss, who has stayed, I think, at 2 in the first couple of rankings we've done, just because we've certainly been high on the Rebels, but obviously there was going to be a team that would jump in, and wasn't much that separated them with the other team, which we all know who that is by now. But the Rebels take care of business against MTSU, and now will play an interesting game on the road against Wake Forest, though it's worth noting Wake Forest dropped that week 1 game, or they dropped a game this past week to Virginia. So,
yeah, I mean, Ole Miss continues to do what we expect them to do, and that's score points. And this year, the way their defense is to make big stops, I feel like they did that. And this is going to be a good Ole Miss team. We're still waiting for that game to really see them. Maybe it's this week against Wake Forest to really learn more about this team. But again, just they did what we expected them to do, and that was score a lot of points.
Yeah, and they're also not giving up points, which we said look out for this defense before the season. Now, the Walter Nolan story will be one to watch. It feels like Lane Kiffin has kind of downplayed that, but losing him maybe would change things a little bit. But I still think this is right there. I still have Ole Miss at 2. I'm waiting for a reason to move them down. Maybe our next team, next team gave enough of us in the vote reasons to do it, but I've still got Ole Miss at 2.
Yeah, I think Texas probably accomplished that by going in and winning against Michigan, who, again, we can debate whether Michigan's a top 10 team. I don't think any of us thought they were going into that game. And Texas went up, and not easy to win there no matter how good Michigan is, but they took care of business.
And they looked good doing it. I love their defense, able to stop Michigan the way they did. Quinn Ewers looked good. The run game looks good. Jaden Blue. And those guys. So I was really impressed with Texas. I mean, again, I think they're one of the top teams in the country that can go deep this year. I really do.
That was a game that I felt like, again, Texas was better than the touchdown favorite that it was in that game. If you watched it, they proved it from the first snap. I mean, there were some self-inflicted wounds early, I think, with penalties and things that kept this closer than it did. But if you watched that game, you had zero doubt from the first drive or two who was going to win the game. And I get Michigan's down, but to go win in the big house with that much on the line with the packed house was super, super impressive. They are a national title contender.
And then there is Georgia, who stays the top. They did allow a field goal in the final play, which Kirby Smart can use in practice this week. But otherwise, the Bulldogs take care of business against Tennessee Tech, and now get ready to play our number 15 team in this week's rankings, the Kentucky Wildcats.
Yeah, kind of. It went like we thought it would. Again, Georgia is declared number one until they change their minds.
I don't think we learned anything here other than Trevor Etienne is out of the doghouse, 5 carries for 78 yards, wondering how that was going to go. But look, Georgia tends to kind of underwhelm, I feel like, in these. I'd have to check the records in these FCS games. But we all know what Georgia can do. They established that in week 1. This is a game I'm sure Georgia could have won by 80 points had it wanted to. Really just nothing to see here other than now we know Etienne is back and part of what they're going to do offensively.
There you have it. Week 3 power rankings. Wrap us up, Chris.
Oh, that's right. I'm hosting. Yes, thank you for watching us here at Southeastern 16. Got a lot going on, as you can tell. We're covering baseball, football, and basketball year-round. Best way to get that, hit the subscribe button. That is free. Hit the like button. That helps our analytics. And, leave your comments. Hit your notifications so you know when we're going live, which we do a good bit. For Chase Robinson and Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.